Good morning. I see a lot of, well, at least unfamiliar to me, faces here. So my name is Nate. I'm an elder here at Victory Baptist, and it is my privilege to share the word with you guys this morning. We've been having a busy summer, so we've been gone off and on since June. So if I haven't met you yet and you've been here, I apologize, but I look forward to meeting some of you guys that I don't recognize. So we are in the book of Ruth today. We've been moving. Nick started a series where we are moving kind of quickly, starting the Old Testament, looking at the overarching story of God's redemption that we see throughout his word from beginning to end. It's one of the very unique and beautiful things about the Bible that we've got this book made up of smaller books and letters and stories collected over the course of thousands of years, written by numerous different authors. Yet there's this cohesive story that is consistent throughout, and the story of God's redemption of his wayward people is paramount throughout this whole thing. And so that's what we're looking at. We are, as I mentioned, been moving quickly. We've been kind of breezing over and glossing over a lot of stories and specifics and details, even doctrine and theology that's really important. Not to just forget about it, but because we want to focus on this greater theme throughout the Bible, from the Old Testament all the way through the New Testament, and that is the story of God's redemption. Those things are important. All those other truths that we're not spending time on right now, they're very important, but their meaning and their importance really is in their support of this greater theme of God's redemption. The fact that it was God's plan from the very beginning to redeem his people in the person of Jesus Christ. So that's what we're doing. That's the lens through which we're looking at Scripture today as we continue in Ruth. And so bear that in mind as we start our reading. I'm going to be in Ruth. We're going to go through the whole book of Ruth today. We're going to read Ruth chapter 1 together as I will lead. And if you have your Bible and you're able and willing, please stand with me and follow along as I read Ruth chapter 1. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. And a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of the one was Orpah, the name of the other Ruth. They lived there about 10 years, and both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Then she arose with her daughter-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she was with her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go, return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you, in the house of her husband." Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband this night and should bear sons, would you therefore wait till they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me." Then they lifted up their voices and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. And she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you." And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. So the 2 of them went on until they came to Bethlehem, and when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said, "Is this Naomi?" She said to them, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. This is the word of the Lord. Please bow your heads with me and pray. Oh, you can sit down first, and then we'll pray. Try not to keep you standing too long. Lord, we just come to you this morning. I am so grateful for your word. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be up here teaching and preaching your word this morning. It is a privilege. It is also a heavy responsibility. And as I stand here, God, I am ever more aware of all of my shortcomings and weaknesses. And in spite of that, God, I know that you can use an imperfect vessel like myself to bring forth your word. And we even have the promise in your word, God, that it does not return void. So I pray, God, that you would empty me of myself this morning, that you would speak through me, and that you would open all of our hearts to receive the truths that you have for us this morning in this beautiful story of Ruth. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So we jumped ahead a bit. If you were here last Sunday, David was teaching out of the book of Exodus, right? And I think Exodus 19. Here we are in Ruth. So we've skipped over really about 5 books of the Bible. So just to kind of catch us up and keep us in the context of what's going on here, the children of Israel continued to wander in the wilderness after their exodus from Egypt, right? God delivered them from the land of Egypt, from their oppressors there, and is bringing them out, and he has this promised land for them, but they're not ready to receive it yet. And so they're wandering in the wilderness. We see God continuing. The 10 Commandments have been given. I don't know to what depth David got into that. I tried to listen to the sermon, but there was nothing to listen to. There's some technical difficulties. So he looked really good, but I don't know what he was saying. So the 10 Commandments are given, and then as things continue, the people continue to wander. We read in the books of Leviticus, and especially Deuteronomy too, God continues to declare his law and really sets the conditions for this kind of special covenant relationship he has with the children of Israel, right? Finally, they are ready. The original generation is mostly passed on, and they're about ready to go into the land and obtain the promised land that God has promised them. Moses passes away. God raises up Joshua to take them into the land and to really conquer the land, right? And to drive out all the existing peoples there that don't know the Lord and are serving false gods. And so we see that. Joshua leads them into the promised land. They seize the home that God has promised them. God grants the Israelites victory over many of those people groups, right? And we see them start to inhabit the land, and towards the end of Joshua, or in the middle of Joshua, we see the children of Israel dividing up the land as God would ordain, and really begin to settle in. But they were commanded to continue to drive out the inhabitants. And as the story goes from Joshua into the beginning of Judges, we see that they were not faithful in that command. They became complacent. They'd been wandering for a while. They were tired. They just wanted to settle in, and they kind of took a shortcut. Instead of continuing on the path that God had set before them, driving out all of these foreign, godless, worshipers of other gods that could have a bad influence on them, they became complacent, decided to settle the land, and allowed a lot of those people to continue living in them and among them. So then that brings us to the times of the Judges, okay? And we saw from the very first chapter of Ruth that we just read that this story takes place in the times of the Judges. It says, in the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So that's where we are. Ruth, the story of Ruth, the story we're going to read today, takes place during this time of the Judges, okay? And if you know the Bible, you're probably very familiar with a lot of the stories from the Judges, the stories like Samson and Deborah, Barak, Gideon. This time of the Judges was a period of about somewhere between 300 and 400 years where we see this continuous cycle constantly taking place, right? As soon as Joshua passes away, it says, I think in the very beginning of the book of Judges, that the next generation, the elders there that were around Joshua, they were faithful to the Lord. When that generation passed away, it was like the next generation did not know the Lord, okay? And so they immediately slip. They're influenced by all of these other people groups around them with all these other false gods, and they basically break covenant with the God who brought them there. They slip into all this false idol worship and a bunch of other atrocious things that I don't want to get into right now, and turn their back on the God who had brought them out of Egypt and brought them into this new land. And we see this cycle. They make these poor choices. They turn their back on God. They worship false gods. After a while, the consequences of their sins, of their of their mistakes come to fruition, usually in the form of enslavement and oppression from some of these neighboring peoples. We see famine off and on throughout the book of Judges. Also, we just see the deterioration of their own society as these people, and I think that we can all relate to this, turn their back on the will of God. We see lawlessness, we see immorality, perversion of justice and truth. All of those things creep into their very own society. And so things weren't good, right? And then after a period of this suffering, whether they're enslaved to other people, a lot of the gross immorality going on, at least a group of the Israelites would turn back to God, calling on God to deliver them from their current circumstances. And God was faithful. He would hear their cries. He'd raise up a judge, a deliverer, to deliver them out of those circumstances and lead them back into covenant relationship with God. The problem was, it seemed as soon as that judge passed away, or as soon as that leadership passed away, they would fall back into their old habits and turn their back on the Lord again. And that just continues over and over and over in different parts of the land of Israel for this 300 to 400 year span. So that's where we find our story of Ruth today. Really, one of the recurring statements in the book of Judges, it says, a lot of the chapters start, the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. So that gives you an idea of what it was like in the times of the Judges. So we're introduced to a family, right, from Bethlehem. We're not really told a whole lot about them. The man's name was Elimelech. He had a wife named Naomi. He had two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. As we were told at the very beginning, there was a famine in the land, presumably as a result of their breaking covenant with God, right? This is one of the hardships they endured as the people of Israel had turned their back on God. And rather than staying in the land and enduring this hardship, Elimelech and his wife Naomi decide, we're going to go somewhere else where there's food. And so they decide to move to Moab. Moab was directly east of the land of Judah, where this family was from. They were Ephrathites, lived in Bethlehem in the land of Judah, of the tribe of Judah. And they bordered, their land on the east was bordered by the Dead Sea, and across the Dead Sea from them was the land of Moab. So they journeyed, it's probably only 30 miles as the crow flies, but they had to go up north around the northern tip of the Dead Sea and come into Moab, probably a 50-mile journey into this strange land. Not only a strange land, but the Moabites were actually enemies of God's people. And one of these groups, one of the ites, the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Amorites, that were supposed to be driven out of the land around the nation of Israel, the promised land. And so they had kind of a spotty history with the Moabites. And yet that's where Elimelech and Naomi seek refuge from this famine. And they decide to move their family and displace them and put them in this strange land. Well, we see in a few brief statements that they get there, Elimelech passes away. We don't know the circumstances of his death, but he's gone. We see the sons, Mahlon and Chilion. We don't know how old they are when they go, but they eventually take wives from the Moabites, and then they pass away as well. And so within a decade, 10 years, we're told that Ruth is there in a strange land. We find that she is widowed, she is childless, and in a strange land, maybe a hostile land even towards her, alone with no one to provide for her. It's often said that one of the greatest tragedies that a person can endure in this life is to outlive their own children. Maybe some of you have experienced that, or maybe you've been around someone who's experienced that type of loss. Considering that gives you an idea of really the state, condition, the mindset that Naomi was in. I need to stop. I meant to do this at the beginning. Disclaimer, I'm going to confuse the names of Ruth and Naomi constantly, and here's why. From the first time I read this book, I have never understood why it is called the Book of Ruth. Because to me, as we go through this story, Naomi seems like the main character. So, for whatever reason, my simple mind made this connection with the name of the book and the person that I see as the main character, and I interchanged them. And I've done it throughout my study. I've had to correct like 5 or 6 times where I wrote Ruth instead of Naomi and vice versa. So if you hear me say, I apologize if it confuses you, but it's my very simple and finite mind trying to wrap my mind around this story. So disclaimer right there, okay? You don't have to come and tell me how many times I mixed up their names after the sermon. I'm going to do it, I guarantee it. So there's one, for those of you who are counting. So Naomi is just really left in this state, I got to say, bordering on hopelessness. She's in this strange land. She has nobody. And to lose your husband and your sons at that time, to be a woman in this society, nobody to provide for her. How is she going to live? And also, let's take a step back and look at the situation she's in, how they got to this point. I mean, really, Elimelech and Ruth, as a people, the nation of Israel, had been breaking covenant with God. We don't know anything about the character of Elimelech or Ruth, Naomi at this point. But the land was bound up in the promises of God. The promised land was bound up in the covenant of God. And so for them to, rather than endure the hardship of the famine that was going on, they chose to move to Moab, which was breaking part of their covenant with God, okay? Whether they did that knowingly or not, we know, said that a lot of the people didn't even know the Lord in these later generations. Whether knowingly or not, they broke that covenant relationship with God, but just by moving to Moab. Basically, not trusting in the Lord to make things right, not turning to the Lord in repentance or encouraging their countrymen to turn to the Lord in repentance. Rather than staying and sticking it out and enduring this hardship, they looked for a shortcut and an easier way, right? And so often I think of myself doing that in my own spiritual life. Rather than trying to make things right, I just want to forget about it and move on. We'll get to that later. So they go to Moab. Not only are they going to this foreign land with these people that they're a place where they worship all these foreign gods against the wishes of their own God. Their sons take Moabite women as their wives, another breach of their covenant with God. They weren't supposed to do that. It was expressly told them in the law that they weren't supposed to do that. So Naomi and her husband, and we don't know if Naomi was just following her husband, maybe his plan and she wasn't crazy about it, but she was faithful to her husband. We don't know the circumstances, but for whatever reason, they broke, as a family, they broke covenant with God in moving to Moab and mingling and intermarrying with the people of Moab, okay? So that's the situation she finds herself. And they went to make life easier, but unfortunately, a decade later, life appears to be much harder for Ruth, right? So she's on the verge of hopelessness. What can she do? There's nobody. She's in a strange land. She has no family there. What is she going to do? How is she going to live? One day, she's in the fields, and she hears in the fields of Moab that God has returned to Judah, the Lord's favor has returned to Judah, and there's no longer a famine in the land. And immediately, it's like a light bulb goes off in her head. She's like, it really brings back to me shades of the story of the prodigal son, where he too, rather than staying and being a productive member of his family and waiting for the time to earn his inheritance, he just goes to his dad and says, Dad, the young man, I want my inheritance now. I want to go and do my own thing. And his father relents, and he goes and blows his inheritance. And then if you remember the story, he's eventually got a job feeding pigs and eating the slop because he's so hungry and destitute that the pigs were eating because he has no way to provide for himself. And eventually he gets to a point where he says, I got to go back to my father and ask for forgiveness. Even if he makes me just the lowest servant in his house, that is better than what I'm going on through now. And it's almost like Ruth sees that God has returned to her people, to her home, and she longs to find the favor of the Lord again. And, I'm sure she's thinking, I can at least go, at least I'm familiar with the land. At least I know people there. At least there's family there. Maybe someone will take pity on me and help to provide for my needs. And so she has this last hope to return to her land and to her God. And so that's what she decides to do. And we see right off the bat, her daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth, decide just to go with her. She strongly encourages them not to, because I think she feels a burden for them. These girls she brought into her family. She can't provide for herself. How is she going to provide for these girls? She's in a hostile land of Moab. To bring these Moabite women back to Bethlehem, they'd be coming to a hostile land. Remember, the Moabites and the Israelites, they didn't get along. So who knows how they would be treated in this new land. And so she tries to encourage them to stay with your families, go back to your mother's house, find a new husband. You're young, you still have hope to find a husband and someone to provide and care for you. And so, not without tears, she convinces Orpah to turn back. But Ruth remains steadfast in her devotion to Naomi. And I think it's a beautiful thing. We're not really told much of the nature of their relationship, but you've got to presume that just from the nature of their conversation, the Lord, both of them are talking about the Lord, Ruth and Naomi, constantly, that Naomi accepted these two girls as really her own. Loved them, respected them, made a home for them, even talked to them and taught them about the Lord of Israel, because they know who he is. And so Ruth refuses to go back to her own family. We're all familiar with the old adage, blood is thicker than water, meaning that familial ties, blood relations are always stronger than bonds of friendship or love even. Well, apparently Ruth was not familiar with that, because she was willing to forsake all, her own family included, to stay with Naomi. Here's what she says in response when Naomi tries to talk her into staying. She says, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you, for where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, your God, my God. May the Lord do so to me and more also, if anything but death parts me from you." So Ruth declares her devotion not only to Naomi, but really to her God, a new way of life as well, with a new people. So they return to Bethlehem. We don't even get a 50-mile journey for two women at that time. Who knows what that was like alone, but we don't get told of any of those details. They return to Bethlehem. Naomi with Ruth in tow. They come into Bethlehem at the time of the barley harvest. Now, just for information's sake, the barley harvest was usually in April or May, so it's mid-spring when they roll into town, and it causes quite a stir, as it probably would. Here's Naomi. There was no FaceTime back then. There was no Skype, no messenger. So there was no postal service, no telephones. There's no way for them to keep in touch with these people, especially if they moved to another land. So as far as the community was concerned, really Elimelech and Ruth, who knows what happened to them? They just ceased to be. But yet, 10 years later, here comes Naomi back into town with Ruth in tow, this Moabite girl. And so it causes some excitement in town. I imagine even today, it hasn't been near a decade, but if Dax and Sarah and their kids were just to walk in the doors there unannounced, it would cause some excitement. Or even the walkers today, they've only been gone a few weeks. They walked in the door right now, it would cause a lot of excitement in our church. So here comes Naomi back into town, and it causes all this excitement. And people are seeking her, wanting to know what's been going on. And she has this very interesting response. She says, "Do not call me Naomi," which in the original language, her name meant pleasant or sweet. She says, "Call me Mara," which means bitterness. "For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" So she has this kind of, people are like, "Naomi, how are you? What's going on?" And she's just like, "Don't call me Naomi. Call me bitter." It seems kind of dramatic, but think about where she's at in her life, right? And think about the tough pill it probably was to swallow to return to Bethlehem. I'm sure when they left, now this is me reading into the text a little bit, okay? So bear that in mind. But I'm sure when they left, there were people that were trying to discourage them from going. Why would you go to Moab? Those are our enemies. Those are a godless people. Why would you go there? And I'm sure there were people that maybe didn't think it was a bad idea, but I'm sure there were people that didn't think it was a good idea, maybe voiced their opinion. And Elimelech was convinced that that was what he needed to do for the betterment of his family. And how did things turn out? Like so many times, I can look at it in my own life where I thought, this is the way I need to go. This is going to be so much better. Things did not go according to plan. They left a family, a cohesive unit, 2 sons, which was a blessing at that time. We know they had some land, as we'll see in the story, so they weren't poor or destitute. They had some resources. They left to Moab to avoid this famine. Maybe it was supposed to be temporary, we don't know. But to find an easier path, right? And things just go sideways. Elimelech dies, the sons marry Moabite women, then they pass away, and Ruth is left with nothing. She went there full, she says, and she has come back totally empty. And so I can imagine them leaving for Moab, probably mixed emotions among the community, some people wishing them well, some people saying, "Oh, I really hope I don't have to say I told you so someday." And you know that feeling when you're trying to do what you think is best for your family and not everyone agrees, whether it's your in-laws or your own parents or family members or people at your church, people who you respect and love. It's hard sometimes to stick with your guns. It's even harder when things don't work out the way you thought, and some of those people may have been right. And so she's returning to this. She's kind of coming back in town, and she's had days to think about this as they're making this trek back to Bethlehem, thinking about what it's going to be like to return to these people. All these people, she's probably thinking of the people that came to her and said, this is not a good idea. You guys shouldn't be doing this. And she's knowing she's going to have to face all these people. She left probably envied by some with her 2 sons and the family that they had and their resources, and she's coming back totally empty. So it was a very humbling return for Naomi, and that's probably why we see her response the way it is. And the other thing I want to point out about her response, it's clear that she isn't happy about the circumstances of her return or the way things had gone in Moab, but she does attribute all that has happened to the Lord, right? Recognizing that his sovereignty over the situation, even if not understanding his plan at the time. Okay, so bear that in mind as we move forward with the story. So Naomi and Ruth arrive in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest, as I mentioned. Okay, the barley harvest started in April or May. Within about 4 weeks, the wheat was ready to harvest. So there was this long period of weeks of harvesting between barley and wheat, and that's what they're coming into. So they move into Bethlehem. They're trying to get settled. They've got to provide for themselves, right? So Ruth volunteers to go out and glean among the barley fields after the reapers, as was the custom and the law at the time, okay? Leviticus 19:9 says, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap your field right up to its edge. Neither shall you gather the gleanings after your harvest. You shall leave them for the poor and for the sojourner. I am the Lord your God. So this is one of the ways the needy and the unfortunate were able to obtain food, okay? It was a law of God. It required work. You had to go to the field and gather the wheat and harvest it yourself. But it was a way for people to provide for themselves when they had no other way. So Ruth knows of this custom apparently and volunteers. Says, Naomi, why don't I go to the field and glean behind some of these harvesters? So she does that. That way we can at least eat, okay? So she goes to the fields and she's following the reapers and she's picking up the grain that's left behind. And it's hard work. I'm sure it's hot. And she finds herself eventually in Boaz's field. Now, Boaz, as we will see, is a close relative of Elimelech's, okay? So he is overseeing this harvest. This is his land, his barley, and so he's overseeing the harvest, and he sees this woman following his reapers, and he says to his foreman, who's that woman? He didn't recognize her, apparently. And the foreman tells him, oh, that's Ruth. She's the one who returned with Naomi from the land of Moab, the daughter-in-law of Naomi. And so Boaz goes directly right up to Ruth. And this is what he says, if you're following along in your own Bible. We are in chapter 2, verse 8. He says, now listen, my daughter. Do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that you are reaping, and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn. Then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? But Boaz answered her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Then she said, I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, though I am not one of your servants. So Boaz steps in. He encourages her not to go to anyone else's field. He says, here, just keep reaping in my field, okay? He offers her food. He offers her protection, which in this day and age was probably a pretty big thing. As we talked about the times of the judges, there was a lot of lawlessness going around. If you've read through the judges, you've seen some of the crazy things that happened, and that women or anyone that was weak was really it was a vulnerable time for them. So he offers her protection, right? So that she can glean, gather food for her and her mother-in-law, and not have to worry about her needs, really. Just focus on the work at hand, not worry about strangers around her, constantly looking around, making sure there's nobody scoping her out or any dangerous-looking folks around, not having to worry about where she's even going to get her meal to feed herself throughout the day. He takes care of all of that for her. It's really a gracious offering. And when she questions why he's treating her with such kindness, he says that he heard of the kindness and devotion to Naomi. So Naomi is a family member of his. He was a close relative of Elimelech. He obviously probably knew who Naomi was before she left. And now that she's returned, and these stories, we talk about the excitement in Bethlehem over their return. I'm sure the story spread like it does, and especially in a small town, quickly as to what happened and the kindness that Ruth showed Naomi in returning with her and her devotion to Naomi. And so Boaz has heard about this, and he has the means and the opportunity to repay a little bit to this woman who'd shown kindness, a foreigner who'd showed kindness to his relative. And so he takes the opportunity to do so. So as the day continues, he shows her more kindness. He gives her food at the mealtime, includes her in the mealtime for his workers. He even pulls his workers aside and says, hey, let's leave a little bit more of the barley behind for Ruth to glean. And so he purposely tells his workers to leave some of the more of the grain behind so Ruth can continue to glean. And she goes home with a really good haul for a day of gleaning, apparently, because Naomi's like, where did you glean today? And so Ruth tells her about her day. And at the end, after mentioning Boaz is the one who came and was so kind to her, Naomi mentions that Boaz is a close relative of one of their redeemers. Okay? This is the first time we see this word in this story. What is a redeemer? What was a redeemer? We are, as a church today, we're very familiar with the word redeemer, and we immediately associate that with Jesus. But remember, this is the Old Testament. This is before Jesus really steps on the scene. So what did that word redeemer mean to Old Testament Israelites, okay? I did a little research and I found several definitions, so I'm going to read through a few of them just to kind of give us a picture of what that role looked like, okay? One charged with the duty of restoring the rights of another and avenging his wrongs, okay? The word that is translated to redeemer can also be translated as avenger sometimes in the Old Testament, okay? A redeemer is one who delivers or rescues someone by paying a price. To redeem is literally to buy out. The nearest living blood relation to a man had certain obligations and offices to discharge under certain contingencies. A kinsman redeemer under the Mosaic law was a male relative who had the responsibility to act on behalf of a relative who was in trouble, in danger, or in need. That's certainly where Ruth and Naomi were at. So in this case, being one of Elimelech's nearest remaining relatives, Boaz was eligible to be a redeemer on behalf of Naomi and Ruth. So bear that in mind. Now we get a little bit of a picture of what a redeemer was at this time. And we'll continue the story to see how that plays out, okay, in this story. So several weeks go by. Ruth continues to glean in the fields of Boaz, right? All through the barley and the wheat harvest, we are told in Scripture. So this is several weeks of gleaning. She's providing. Her and Naomi are able to eat at least. And Naomi, we find in chapter 3, probably after much thought and deliberation over the previous weeks, scheming, trying to figure out, okay, we've got some food, now what? I mean, this is great for during the harvest. What are we going to do when this is over? She's trying to figure out how her and Ruth are going to live. And she comes up with, I guess, a plan, an idea. I don't want to say a scheme. I don't want to undermine it that way. But she has an idea, and she says, Ruth, sit down. Here's what we're going to do. She has this idea of a way to take care of both her and Ruth at the same time. And so she tells Ruth what her plan is, and then Ruth puts it into practice. In Ruth chapter 3, if you join me in verse 6. So she, this is Ruth, went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. He said, "Who are you?" I had to laugh at this because, time out. It totally made me think of, if you're a parent, you've probably experienced this. He's tired. He's been harvesting. They have their meal. He's contented with a hard day's work. He lays down, probably falls asleep really hard, and wakes up at midnight to find a person at his feet. You're still half awake. You don't really know what's going on. Like, who are you? So many times when our kids were younger, I can't tell you how many times I woke up in the middle of the night, laying on my side. I sleep on my side a lot, on the edge of my bed. And I'd open my eyes, and there's just a face right here. Ah! Who are you? It was always one of my kids that needed something, a drink of water, or to go to the bathroom, whatever the case may be. So anyway, that just, for some reason, when I read that the other day when I was preparing for the message, I had to laugh out loud because I could totally relate to where Boaz was in this moment. Okay. All right, back to the story here. So he says, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." And he said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, and that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask, for all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And now it is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning." And so Ruth, really what she's doing is she's asking Boaz to step in and be that kinsman redeemer for Naomi and she, to carry on the line, and we'll get into it a little bit more here shortly, of Elimelech. Okay, there was provisions in God's law for when a situation like this happened. Elimelech died, his sons died, there's no one to carry on the name, there's no one to carry on the inheritance. If Naomi were to pass away, really their family line dies. And as I already mentioned, the promised land, the allotment of land to the nation of Israel, to the individuals as well as the nation as a whole, was bound up in the promises of God. This was their promised land. This land was Elimelech's family's land to be passed down generation to generation, and was a sign of that covenant promise, covenant relationship with God. And so it was a big deal if there was no heir, nobody to inherit it, to carry on the family line. And so that's what Ruth and Naomi are asking Boaz to do. Step in, be our redeemer, so that we can carry on our family line. So Ruth remains at his feet until morning. Boaz is surprised. He commends her, right? He says, "I would love to be a redeemer, but there is one who is closer in relation than I am to Elimelech." So he has basically the first right of refusal, this other man, because he's closer. He's the first one to have the opportunity to be the redeemer, okay, for this family. And so he mentions that. He says, "I will go talk to him in the morning. If he does not want to redeem, if he does, great. You guys are taken care of. If not, I will redeem you." Okay? So he sends Ruth home, gives her a bunch more barley to take home to Naomi. He said, she spends the night at his feet, which is kind of weird. I don't know, it's just a custom thing for the time, but I don't know. Allie's never slept at my feet, but that's okay. I'm not going to pass judgment or anything there. Just thought it was kind of strange. Here, stay at my feet, lay on the floor, and, Anyway, sorry. So she goes home in the morning. He sends her home with a bunch more barley. He says, "Await," and basically she goes home to await what's going to happen, because he says, "I'm going to take care of this thing this morning," right? Boaz goes straight to the city gate. That's where all the town business is held at the time, right? And he immediately finds the man who he's looking for, this man who's a closer relation to Elimelech. We're not even given his name, okay? And it says in Ruth 4, verses 2 through 6, he took the men of the elders of the city and he said, "Sit down here." So they sat down. And then he said to the Redeemer, this man who was closer in relation to Elimelech, "Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me, that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you." And the man said, "I will redeem it." And then Boaz said, "The day that you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth, the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance." Then the Redeemer said, "Ooh, I cannot redeem it for myself." I put that in there, that ooh. "I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it." So it's apparent this Redeemer, he was inadequate to be the Redeemer. It appears that he didn't even, I don't know where he was. Supposedly he was a closer relative to Elimelech than Boaz, but he wasn't really in tune with what was going on. Boaz explains the situation to him, and this guy, even though he could potentially be the Redeemer, he didn't even understand all the implications of being the Redeemer. He hears that there's land for sale, and he's all about that. Yeah, definitely, I'll redeem. I want that land. But he doesn't understand that to take the land is also to take Ruth as a wife, and to try to have offspring and create an heir for this line of Elimelech and of Naomi. He doesn't understand that part of it, apparently. So as soon as that's brought up, he's like, oh. And really he's worried about himself and his own inheritance to his own family line, and worried about that becomes a complicated situation about taking away or detracting from his own inheritance that he could pass on to his own line. So as soon as Ruth becomes part of the bargain, he's like, oh, you know what? I don't think that's going to go over too well. I don't know how my wife is going to feel about that. We don't know if he's married, but it just became a more complicated situation. The cost was too great for him to step in and be the redeemer, right? So he was inadequate. But Boaz, thankfully, he had counted the cost. We don't know if Boaz was married or not. It doesn't seem like he was, but we don't know for sure. But he had counted the cost. He understood the situation, and he could not only pay the cost, but he was willing and even excited to do so. So he was free to step in now as this redeemer for Naomi and Ruth. And he makes sure, as if you continue reading, I won't read it word for word, but he makes sure to announce his intentions very clearly. He has all these elders there, all these leaders of the city, and he announces intentions right there in front of everyone before the gathered witnesses, not only to purchase Elimelech's land from Naomi, but also to take Ruth as his wife and provide an heir for Naomi that would continue the family name and the inheritance. So as the book closes, I'm going to read the last little bit here. Verses 13 of chapter 4 through the end. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, Blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap, and she became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, A son has been born to Naomi. They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now these are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Amminadab. Amminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse. And Jesse fathered David. So we see Ruth is full again. Naomi, I did it again. Naomi and Ruth, but Naomi is full again. She has found her God's favor again. She returned home with the hope of returning to her home, to her God, renewing that relationship with God and finding his favor again. And we certainly see that in the end. She's given a grandson, right? And she's his nurse. The family line continues. Her heart is full. Her home is full. And not only that, we see that this child, Obed, is the grandfather of David, right? The man after God's own heart, who God would use not only to end this really tumultuous time of the judges in Israel's history and to bring some stability to the nation of Israel, but more importantly, the line of David that would bring the Messiah, right? Bring redemption and salvation to the whole world. And she got to be a part. After losing everything, God brings her back, fills her up again, and her grandson gets to be a part of that line in leading up to the Messiah. Okay, I want to take a minute and mention something here before we close. A lot of times the story of Ruth, and its story has always been so confusing to me. I remember as a new believer in my teens reading this story, I was always confused. Why is it called Ruth? It just always seemed to me that Naomi was the main character, right? And then when I've heard it taught several times over the years, it just seems like there's such an emphasis on this love story between Ruth and Boaz. And I hate to be that guy, but I feel like it's a little bit romanticized, right? I mean, if you really look at the way the story is presented in the text, it's not the most romantic story to me. We're not really given a lot of details. It's a very brief, succinct story. I mean, we're just kind of given the facts. We're not given a lot of insight into the nature of these relationships. And so it seems to me like you're reading a lot into it to have this view that it was like a love at first sight. Boaz saw her in the fields and immediately loved her and wanted her. And Ruth, loved Boaz and saw that he could provide what they needed and blah, blah, blah. I just feel like that's reaching. And it's not really the way it's presented in the text. I mean, really, this is so unromantic. But their union is really more or less presented as a business transaction, right? I mean, that's really what we see here. Yes, Boaz is kind to her, But when I look at Boaz, the way he's presented in the word, I just see a kind, loving man who is faithful to God. Every time he talks in this book, he's talking about the Lord. We see him in this time of the Judges. He's upholding the law and the customs of God, right? He's allowing people to glean from his fields. He wants to treat Ruth with kindness, not because he's attracted to her necessarily, not because he wants something from her, but because she has shown a kindness to his own family. A foreigner has shown kindness to one of his relatives, and he wants to repay that. He admires that character in Ruth and wants to repay that, okay? Don't forget, too, Boaz is portrayed as an older man here, okay? Old enough probably to be her father. And so every time we see him interacting with Ruth, we always see him referring to her as daughter. The first time he goes up to talk to her in the field, he says, "Listen, my daughter." How many pickup lines have you ever heard that started with, "Listen, my daughter"? Now, I'm not speaking from experience, okay? If I was an older guy trying to pick up on a younger woman, to pursue a younger woman, the last thing I would do would point out the fact that I'm old enough to be her father, right? So I'm making light of it, but the point is, I don't think Boaz's intentions, whether he was attracted to Ruth or not, that was not the priority in his mind in the way he was dealing with Ruth. He saw a woman to be commended for the way that she had shown devotion to a relative of his coming back to the land. He recognized probably the hard situation, not just the circumstances of losing her husband and sons, but to return to a land that she had scorned in a way, and return and admit, like, hey, this didn't work out. He probably recognized all of that, and being a close relative, he appreciated that Ruth was able to stick with her and show that devotion. And then from Ruth, it seems to me that Ruth's priority is always Naomi. Her devotion is to Naomi. She does whatever Naomi asks. I think her priority in all of this was to make sure that Naomi was taken care of, to secure a future for Naomi as well as herself. I'm sure love was in their home, right? They're married, they have a child. They're both people of high character, high quality of character. I am sure that love was a part of their relationship, was in their home, and I'm sure that it grew over time. I just don't think that it was this movie story kind of love at first sight, Twitter-pated type of a thing that a lot of times we hear associated with the story. And so, that in mind, I take a moment to say that because I think that when the story is presented that way, it can distract us from what the real meaning and the real impact of this story is, right? There are a few themes in this story, okay? We see suffering, right? In the very beginning, Ruth loses her husband, loses her sons, is left destitute, really, like we said, on the verge of hopelessness, okay? So there's suffering as a theme in this story. Certainly there's kindness between Ruth and Naomi, a daughter-in-law and her mother-in-law, their devotion and kindness to each other we see throughout the story. We see the kindness of Boaz before he even steps in as the kinsman redeemer, even just stepping in and providing and helping to provide for those needs for this woman, young woman and her mother-in-law, these relatives of his, okay? It is a story of love and devotion, I think primarily between Naomi and Ruth, right? We see the impact that Naomi had on Ruth in Moab, and it causes Ruth to forsake everything she knew, her own family, and stay devoted to Naomi. So there's a special relationship there, a special love there between Naomi and Ruth. And there is, like I mentioned, there's love, I'm sure, in the home of Boaz and Ruth as the story ends. But more than any of that, I believe it is a story about redemption, right? We talked about how Naomi and Elimelech had broken covenant with God in their sojourn to Moab, right? It's a story about redemption for Naomi. We see her return home, return to her people, return to her God, to the promises of God, kind of with her tail between her legs, but admitting like, hey, this didn't work out. Maybe it was a mistake. But here I am, Lord. I have nothing, but here I am. Can I still find favor? And we see in the end that she does, right? We see that she is redeemed by Boaz, right? And the way that played out in the story, it secures it provides a secure future for her and for Ruth, okay? But it's also a story of spiritual redemption, right? As much as her physical needs were taken care of, it was also that spiritual side of it that we talked about. The redemption of a woman who had strayed from the will of her God, who eventually found herself husbandless and childless in a strange land, a woman with nothing left to cling to but the hope of returning to her home and to her God and finding his favor once again. And we see that in the end of the story, right? Probably more important than her physical needs. She was right with God again. And most importantly, it is a story that points us toward our own redemption in the person of Jesus Christ. Just as in this story, there was the first Redeemer, the law, was not adequate. It was inadequate to redeem us, right? Though there was potential in the beginning for the law, centuries and centuries of human history show that the law was an inadequate redeemer, and it only made us more aware of our need for a Savior. So through his perfect life and the subsequent death of Jesus on the cross, he paid the debt of our sin when no one else could. He alone could count the cost, and he became our perfect kinsman redeemer, restoring our inheritance from God, allowing us to find God's favor once again. That's the real story of Ruth. Okay? So maybe you're like Naomi, brother, sister, believer, fellow believer, and maybe at times, on a daily basis sometimes for me, you've walked away from the promises of God, seeking something better, maybe a shortcut, the grass looking greener on the other side, only to find yourself alone and in a strange place, distant from your God and feeling distant from your God and from his people. Or maybe you don't know God. Maybe you haven't had a relationship with God before. Maybe you didn't grow up aware of his promises and the love of God. So you're like Ruth, and you never knew of God's promises until now, and you hardly dare to believe that they are possible. The message of this redemption, it is for the believer and the unbeliever alike. It is for all of us. And the message is to return, just as Naomi did. She turned her back on Moab and returned to the God and his promises. So the message for all of us is to return. Return to the God that maybe you've never known, that has been waiting patiently and calling you your whole life. Return to the God that you have known and that we still manage to walk away from on a daily basis. For me, I'm sure a lot of you can relate. Always it is to return. Redemption is at hand. I'm just going to close with a simple verse from Romans 10, verse 9. If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is the Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved.